Hello there. When President Biden launched the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, in the United States a year ago, it spread a chill through the UK economy. Some feared that hundreds of billions of dollars of subsidies to US industries would herald a new era of US protectionism. Others noted how UK electric vehicle makers like Arriva and Teva moved their focus to the states surviving on those generous dollar subsidies. Well, a year on, we're told by a report from the Social Market Foundation that not only is the post IRA future not gloomy, but in fact, UK manufacturing has much to look forward to. Gideon Salutin is the author of the report. Gideon, welcome. What silver linings have you detected?
Hey, thanks for having me. Yes, so the first silver lining that we found was that our exposure to US industries was surprisingly low. Less than 15% of UK goods go to the US, and an even smaller fraction of that are impacted by the Inflation Reduction Act. The second was that the US policies proved much less protectionist than they initially appeared. This was partly because of misreading by policy wonks, and partly just because the US policymakers adapted their policies to make it more flexible, especially for their allies. Finally, there was no resort to nationalization of any industries, which was also feared across the world. This left the UK in a decent spot to take advantage of the situation.
We'll look at how that might happen. But of course, as well as the UK getting caught slightly on the hop by the IRA a year ago, the EU was very much caught on the hop and scrambled to come up with its own ideas. And that, in turn, given that, of course, we didn't have a trade agreement with the US, we had a burgeoning trade agreement of sorts with the EU, that also gave rise to concern, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the EU trade agreement was much more what was in jeopardy, especially given their response. Because of the vague nature of the EU policy at the moment, the Green Deal, we still don't exactly know what the future is going to look like. The EU has left it very open for each of their member states to decide how much they want to subsidize industries, how much they want to regulate. And so it remains unclear yet how much the UK will be affected.
But the fact is, I mean, we ought to just probe a little deeper into the IRA. Is very much supportive of new industry, green industry, all of the net zero industries and technologies that we're placing so much hope on. So, what is it about the potential? Um, as the outline from the EU becomes clearer, what is it about that gives you hope that UK manufacturers might find a strong market in the EU?
What gives me hope is the reaction to the IRA across the world. I mean, originally when the IRA took place, certain allies of the US did have reason to panic. I'm thinking more about Canada, Mexico, other areas that are much more exposed to the US market. And what we saw was the US taking advantage of those allegiances to make it more possible to trade. We saw them expanding their mutual agreements, especially in those areas that you mentioned, solar panels, EV auto manufacturing, heat pumps. All of those supply chains are getting more and more integrated. In a visit to Canada this spring, Joe Biden made clear the advantages to the US. He said, look, we're securing supply chains within our region, and that makes US businesses profitable. I think the EU should see a similar opportunity in the UK. We can create these trade agreements. We don't have to go back to a single market to do so. But to trade in these specific, strategic, future thinking industries could bring manufacturing jobs and industries to both regions.
To what extent is the amount of localized content, domestic produced content, all those regulations which have put a lot of fear into the automotive industry, 50%, for instance, in terms of domestic input. How much will that play a part in the future relations? Do you believe?
It still remains unclear. Those targets are flexible, and we're not sure how much each vehicle is going to be impacted. Looking at the US, they're still ironing out which vehicles qualify for those different tax credits under domestic content requirements. The truth is, we still don't know how the EU UK relationship is going to look.
But you do believe there's going to be a 40% threshold when it comes to green industries, and that has an open door, has prizes the door open for UK manufacturers.
Exactly. I mean, limiting the domestic content requirements to 40% was much less than UK policymakers originally feared. There were those in the EU calling for 80, 85% domestic content requirements, which would have been quite scary. What we're seeing instead is I would call a wide open door. I mean, 60% left open for foreign manufacturing, and the UK is best positioned, both regionally and sectorally, to take advantage of that.
But of course, that will depend on closer ties and good negotiations with the EU. Current government, particularly with a very Brexity right wing, doesn't look like that's going to be possible.
Yeah, we'll see. I think there's a lot still left to be discussed, especially regarding net zero. A big part of this report was saying the UK hasn't yet responded. Jeremy Hunt has signaled that he wants to respond in the fall, so maybe we'll get more of an inkling then.
Another factor, just before we get on to the more domestic politics, is geopolitics and the fact that there's growing unease around China's intentions. I think you believe that might also affect the way the EU thinks about closer ties with closer neighbours like the UK, even though we're outside the EU.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, looking to the IRA as an example, one of their tenets was economic, one was environmental, but the third was the security nature. They wanted to shore up their supply chains. They wanted to make sure that China wasn't in complete control of their clean tech and future tech. And we're starting to see a shift. China's still going to be a major player, probably the major player in this industry. But this goal of shifting supply away from China and towards other areas, towards Europe, towards the UK, towards North America, is proving beneficial for economies in the region.
Getting back to domestic politics, I mean, in isolation, all that you've talked about sounds very positive, and the fact that there could indeed be greater opportunities for UK manufacturers, but it sits politically alongside the growing fear of the amount of money that consumers are going to have to lay out, the cost of net zero. We've heard about it recently. There was the recent by-election, which has shifted thinking. Can this be squared in the current environment?
Yeah, Uxbridge has had a pretty shocking effect on discourse around manufacturing, especially net zero manufacturing. And I thought it would be useful to clear up a few details. The IRA is without a doubt saving people money in the US. Consumers in the US saved 5 billion this year on energy payments, and that's not even taking account of the growth in wages that come as directly as a result of the IRA or indirectly from jobs attached to them. EVs are made cheaper by policies like this. Americans now see $7,000 taken off the price of an EV as long as it was manufactured in North America. And we're starting to see subsidies for energy efficient appliances like heat pumps, which will save consumers money in the long run, but also in the short run if we're looking at subsidies for them, tax receipts, that kind of a thing. Um, Lastly, as long as these policies are made with representation of local authorities, local unions in mind, you do get to see representation leading to higher wages as a result.
If let's flip all that on the reverse. If we don't do something, there's a strong risk that the UK is going to be left behind, is it not?
Yeah, I hesitate to overstate the risks to this. The risk is our economy stays as it is. Less emphasis on manufacturing, more emphasis on services, and we can look at the positives and negatives to that. What we do miss is an opportunity to greatly expand certain industries. These net zero industries, including EVs, including heat pumps, and energy appliances, are going to be future industries that could be incredibly beneficial, not just for economic growth, but also for more wages across the board. There is a risk that the UK misses out on an opportunity to do that.
And final question, we haven't really touched on what the cost of this is likely to be in terms of government borrowing at a time of great stringency. How much cash is the UK going to have to lay out on this?
That really depends on how ambitious we want to be. First off, I want to make clear that any cash launched in the form of subsidies tends to have a startlingly high return. The U.S. has spent an estimated 40 billion, that's U.S. dollars this year on their subsidies. They're seeing over 200 billion in greater economic activity. A lot of that money is coming from outside of the US and making the economy bigger than it was last year. That said, yeah, it's going to cost some upfront cash. If we wanted to match the average that other countries are offering as a percentage of their GDP, it would be around 2% over 10 years. So that's about 54 billion pounds. That really depends on what sectors we want to emphasize and if we want to give more than others or less.
And I guess just to make it absolutely clear, because when we talk about any kind of industrial strategy, there are always going to be people who say the government shouldn't get involved in industrial strategy, picking winners, all the old mantras from the 70s and so on. This is not about government dictating what industries should or shouldn't be, and it's opening the door to private investment.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said before, there has been zero nationalization and very little government control. Businesses can choose how they want to respond to these offers. If they don't want to take subsidies for any reason, they don't have to. All that we're saying is that to keep up with certain industries, to attract these industries into the UK, to attract manufacturing, we are going to have to take into account that what they can offer, what they are being offered abroad.
Well, Gideon, thank you very much indeed. That's Gideon Salutin from the Social Market Foundation. Fascinating report. There's a link to it on the screen right now. Do download it and have a good read of it. As I say, interesting stuff. This has been a special report from Manufacturing TV. I'm Nick Peters. Thanks for watching.